welcome everyone here with us tonight. We've got some visitors, and so we'll here to 1 Kings 8, dedication of the temple. And this time I'm going to start out with the blessing. Maybe we'll go better. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. Okay, tonight we're looking at the dedication of the first temple, sometimes called Solomon's temple, or mostly called Solomon's temple, actually. And he was about late 20s when he finished the construction of the temple. The way I look at the Bible, he dedicated it at that point. There are others that say no, he waited 13 years until he got the palace all done, and then he dedicated the temple at that point. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because if you had a temple already up and running and looking beautiful, then you're not going to just set it, let it sit there and grow cobwebs for 13 years while you're off doing something else. So I think that it was dedicated, and then he just kept on with his building program, and his palace got built later on. But anyway, he was around the end of the 20s, maybe early 30s at the very, very latest. And he had all of this stuff in the temple that had been accrued by David, and he had gotten Hiram, king of Tyre, to come down and help out with all of this. And so I did want to, now we're still here in chapter 8. So I was going to do 8, 9, and 10. Somebody said they can't hear me. All right. I was going to do 8, 9, and 10 tonight, but I got to looking at the temple and so forth. And so it just was better to do the temple tonight, and then we'll look at the last 2 chapters of the upsweep of Solomon's reign. We'll do that next week. So I did want to drop back just a little bit, and there's Solomon's empire. Leave that up there so that people can go back and look at it. All right, there's some things that were kind of cool that I missed last week. I didn't bring out to you, and that was these columns they're made out of bronze. All right, and quite the work of art. And so they were freestanding, and they had names. These columns had names. This one here on the left-hand side, his name was Boaz, and it means in Hebrew, in him is strength, in God is strength. And then Yakin, over here on the right side, it means he will establish. And so I think those are 2 great names to have in front of the temple there. And it was made by a Israelite whose name was Hiram, or Hiram, the same name as the king, but these are 2 different guys, because it talks about Hiram, the craftsman, being the son of a bronze worker, and he was just a regular blue-collar union guy. All right, so then there's some of the furniture that was in there. Just wanted to point some of these things out. These are the things that were out in the courtyard. Last week we talked about the stuff that was inside, the menorahs, or the candle holders, and the showbread tables, and the altar of incense. And we'll talk about the ark here in just another minute. But this these things out here, this sea, or this bronze sea here, you look at that, and it's got it's on the back of 12 bronze oxen, and there are 3 of them are pointing in each of the 3 cardinal directions. This thing held 12,000 gallons of water, and so that was a lot of water. And then you got the bronze altar, and it was, I used to think, well, How could you have a bronze altar? You would end up melting it if you used it. And as it turned out, I researched it, and no, bronze. Yeah, you can smelt it, and you can get it to melt, but you have to do that much. It has to be much hotter than just a normal wood fire that would be used to sacrifice animals. And then they had these 10 smaller basins that they could use for um, the things that they needed, rinsing the animal parts, because sometimes the Bible says, well, then wash this part in water and then put it in the sacrifice, or wash it in water, and then you can eat it, and so forth. So each one of these would only hold about 240 gallons. But I'm sure that was still pretty heavy if you had to push those things around. And then, so let's look at 1 Kings and 8. This is where they're talking about bringing the ark up to the temple. Now, the Israelites regarded the ark as the throne of Adonai. That was the place. It was a place where he manifested his presence in a local way. Because that's where when Moses would go into the tabernacle, he could speak to the Lord face to face, as a man would speak face to face. And so this was a kind of a hands-on, something that the Israelites could comprehend, that God was there in that spot, and that was their focal point. And so the ark had been there in David's tabernacle ever since David brought it up from Obed-Edom, and that was in 2 Samuel 6. And so it's the only item in this new temple that was not new. And so maybe God didn't change it so to help people realize that that he symbolized, the ark had not changed. He was the same as he was before. His person, his methods of dealing with them at the mercy seat were the same way as they had been. So that gave them a little bit of continuity, as it were. All right. So the ceremony of installing the ark in Solomon's temple took place during the Feast of Tabernacles. I think that's very appropriate, and it's kind of interesting that this Feast of Tabernacles, it's the last one of the year where all of the Israelite males had to attend. It was the feast that was a commemoration of the Lord's faithfulness during his people's wanderings during the out in the wilderness, and it looks back at slavery and being freed from the slavery of Egypt, but it looks forward to the promised land and getting into the promised land. And so bringing the ark into the temple symbolized that fulfillment of that hope, of getting into the land. So and as it turns out, Solomon had to wait almost an entire year to do this, because they had already completed work on the tabernacle, on the temple, but they didn't actually get to dedicate it until a year later. Because he wanted to do it on Sukkot, and they had completed the temple just after the month after Sukkot. So he had to wait 11 months then to go and do the dedication during the Feast of Sukkot and have that symbolism for the people. So like I said, this embodies the very idea of God being with his people, and the people didn't regard the sovereignty of a human king as really firmly established. Okay, he was their king, but it's kind of temporary and transitory unless he had built a palace for himself. So that was one of the things that, David really didn't have a big imposing palace. He had building, but it wasn't anything near what Solomon had. And so they looked at the this whole idea of having a temple that represents their God, and then later on having the palace from Solomon, as now the kingdom is established, and we're here, and we're not going anywhere. So now they talked about it's kind of funny, some of the things that they talk about in here about the poles that were on the ark. Now, these let me see if I didn't put it up in there. When they were putting this thing in, let me get the poles that were on the ark. They talked about them, how that they, in the Old Testament, I mean, in the King James Version, if you read the King James Version, it says that they removed the poles out of the ark. And you have to kind of maybe assume, and I read some of these commentators, that that guys that have all of these theology degrees and stuff like that, that they said, oh yeah, that the Bible says that they withdrew the poles, and but what did the Bible say? What did God require of the people with the Ark of the Covenant? They said, "Do not remove the poles. Don't take them out of there." And so perhaps what it's talking about here is that they shifted them a little bit because the poles were long. Some people estimated that they were like 30 feet long. I don't know. I tried to find the length of the poles, but I couldn't find it. But somebody said that, yeah, it was estimated that they were 30 feet long. Well, that's interesting. You'd have 30-foot long poles to hold a box that was 2.5 feet by a foot and a half by a foot and a half. That's not a very big box, and you're going to have those great big old long poles with it. Well, be that as it may, it talks about these poles sticking out of the ark and protruding into the holy place, and but it couldn't be seen. It could be seen in the holy place, but it couldn't be seen outside the temple itself. And so got to thinking about that. Well, what's the big deal? I mean, what was going on here? And it occurred to me, I went back and looked at then the instructions on building the ark. Well, guess what? Most everybody gets the idea of the ark. And here's a picture of the temple, Solomon's temple, here's a cutaway of it, of course, and it was all gold inside, and carvings, and these cherubim here. They were I don't know what they look like. This artist here said they look something like I don't know, some kind of a mythical Pegasus or something like that. And I don't think that's what they look like, but whatever. I've got some other pictures there that look at something else. But anyway, that's kind of gives you an idea of what the temple looks like inside. Now, here is what I believe is a fair estimation of what the temple looks like, or the Ark of the Covenant looks like. Normally, what you'll have is you'll have the rods going the other way. They'll be going lengthwise on the ark rather than on the short side. And but at the same time, they call this the front of this area here, the front of the ark, and it was supposed to be facing east. And the poles then would be poking out that way, going in an east and west direction. So to me, that's the only way. And the other thing is that Okay, so how could you function if you had these poles sticking out there, and you would have these poles up about 18 inches, um, and so the priest would have had to step, way over those poles, and with their long robes, and doing all the stuff, to carrying the basin of blood that they're sprinkling around for the Day of Atonement. That would have been a little bit sloppy. So I went back and looked, and it says that you had that the ark was supposed to fit these rings, gold rings, at the foot of each corner. So and it specifically says at the foot of each corner. So most ark pictures have the circles up here, and the poles running the other way, and it just doesn't fit with what the Bible said how it would be. So if they were down on the ground, on the floor, yeah, they could stick out, and it would not be that big a deal for the priest to step up over 2 or 3 inches, as opposed to it would have been stepping up over 18 inches if it went up at the top. So it's just, one of those kind of things that you get to looking at it and trying to make it fit with what the other, the scriptures from when it was built. When if make it all fit together and still have something that was cohesive, and so that way maybe they did withdraw the poles a little bit, and so we just don't know. We just know that they poked out a little bit, and you could see them in the holy place, but you could not see them from outside. And so it's just interesting that they would mention something like that in the telling of all of this. So inside the ark, well, now here's another picture. Here's another picture of the going into, this is a model, going into the Holy of Holies, and there again they've got the poles running the wrong way, and they're really little bitty short poles. All right, these poles may very well have been longer, because it would take this box here. It wasn't very big, but it was overlaid with gold, and the cherubim on top were gold. The mercy seat on top was pure gold. It would have had to have been to a certain thickness to make sure that it didn't bow in the middle, and so forth. So that rascal weighed a whole lot of pounds, a whole lot of money. It weighed a lot. So for the priest to carry it, it may very well have had like 3 priests in front on each pole, and 3 priests in back on each pole. So a total of 12 priests carrying this thing, because it would have weighed several hundred pounds with all of that gold. So could very well have been a real long poles. But there was one of the tour guides, not our tour guide, but another one in Israel, said that this thing was so heavy that whenever the priest would reach down and pick the thing up, they could not physically pick it up because it was too heavy for men to pick up. But the Ruach, the Spirit of God, would lift the ark up, and they could carry it that way because God was helping them carry the weight. Okay, that's not in the Bible. That's a midrash from somewhere. But anyway, that was an explanation for that. And another thing that they mention in here is that the ark only had the what they call the Decalogue, or the 10 Commandments. Okay, if you want to impress people with your theological knowledge, you said, "Oh yes, it housed the Decalogue." And then they'll ask you, well, what's the Decalogue? You say the 10 Commandments, and then they go, oh wow, you're so smart. And so so there you go. Use that word. Try to find a place that you can impress somebody with Decalogue. All right. And but remember, it used to have a bowl of manna or manna, the the bread that God gave them from heaven. There was a bowl of that in there, and then alongside of that was the rod of Aaron that budded. Now the rod would not have fit in there, okay? And if you read the Bible carefully, it says that Aaron's rod was set before the ark. Okay, so it was still in the Holy of Holies, but it wasn't in the ark. Well, by this time now, the ark had been captured by the Philistines. Remember Eli, the high priest, or you might say Eli, but Eli, the high priest, his two sons decided on their own that, hey, let's carry the ark into battle with us, and then surely we'll win. Okay, that did not work out well. And what happened is that the ark was captured by the Philistines, and they took it away. Well, there went the bowl of manna, and there went Aaron's rod. So we don't know whatever happened to it. But by this time now, they got the ark back, and the only thing that was left inside it was the 10 Commandments, the stone that had the 10 Commandments on it. And also there are some Jewish sources that the rabbis say that there were bits and pieces of the tablets that Moses broke when he was coming down the mountain, and he saw the people there worshiping the golden calf, and he got so angry he threw the tablets down. And they say that those tablets were in there. Maybe so, maybe not, because the Bible says that the word was in there. You know, God's commandments, those tablets were in there. So anyway, that was what was in there. Now, the other thing is when they put all of this stuff together, let me that there was a pillar of just cloud covered the tabernacle. And they brought the ark in, and then they backed out, and there was a cloud that covered the tabernacle, and it was so heavy. And that's one of the words for glory is weight, kavod, in Hebrew. And so they said that the glory of God was so heavy that the priests couldn't get up. They could not. They just could not get up and do their chores, their duties. And so, in fact, said, now when the Kohanim came out of the holy place, the cloud filled the house of Adonai, so that the Kohanim, the priest, could not stand to minister, because the cloud for the glory of Adonai filled the house of Adonai. Then, okay, so there you see that it wasn't just because it was a cloud and they couldn't see because it was cloudy or smoky or whatever. No, they said they couldn't stand. They couldn't get up. That the weight of God's glory weighed down on them so much they could not even get up. And so the that's quite an image there. So then Solomon gets up in front of the people, and he said to them, he's explaining all of that overwhelming, overpowering glory of this. He said that is that dark cloud of similar to what we had in Mount Sinai. You remember that God's presence was in the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, and that's where the people could actually see where God was and visualize him, because that was their signal to get up and move. When the cloud or the pillar moved, then they knew that they had to move. And so uh, Solomon is saying, well, this is that same kind of cloud that we had at Sinai. And now here it is, this dark pillar. Well, and also think about in the Holy of Holies here in the temple, there were no lights. It was dark in there. And um, so if you, the holy place, the anteroom, the one in front of it that had all the menorahs and the showbread tables and so forth, it had windows up at the top of the walls, and so there was light there. But inside there was no light, and so Solomon talked about this dark cloud, and so that's where he is at that point. So what did he then? He talked about. In fact, Josephus talked about the cloud. Josephus, the historian, and he described it as a diffused and temperate cloud, not a real rough, big thunderstorm that you see when in the rain and in the winter season. Where these things, heavy wind and it's just violent. No, there's just a heavy cloud, diffused and temperate. It wasn't threatening, but it was so heavy they could not stand up. And so Solomon then said, Adonai said that he would dwell in this thick cloud, and I have surely built you a magnificent house, a place for your dwelling forever. And so Solomon looks in there and he recognizes, he establishes the fact that Adonai, our God, is the supreme ruler. He says, I have built you this temple here, and it's so that was he was putting God on the throne at that point for the people, and he blessed God that he was allowed to do that, and he was allowed the privilege of of um, building that temple. And so um, he wanted to emphasize the idea of David's heart to build the temple. You remember, David was the one that really wanted to do that, and God said, no, because you're a man of war, you've killed too many folks, and even though you're a man after my own heart, I'm going to give that to your son to do. So David then was able um, to amass all of the materials, or a lot of the materials for that, and then Solomon was able to build it. Took him 7 years. And so the this temple, and they talk about it as being, and Solomon says that the temple could not hold God. It just wasn't big enough, or nothing could hold God. Said the temple was a house for God's name or his reputation or his characteristics. It's just a small piece of what God really is, and that's what was going to be in the temple. He recognized that our God is so large, so big, that so all powerful. There's not any little dwelling, no matter how magnificent it is here on earth, that God could be contained. The idea, a lot of times we'll say, well, don't put God in a box. Because he's bigger than that. He can think outside the box, where sometimes we can't. And so that's what Solomon is saying here, that uh, God is too big to be put in that box, even though it's all overlaid in gold and it's beautiful. God cannot be put in there. It's only his essence, or his name, his reputation. And so Solomon is demonstrating a lot of humility and gratitude in what he was doing. And if you were to look at what he's saying, he says, I built you this temple. The emphasis was on God and not on himself. He didn't say, well, I great and mighty Solomon built you this little temple. No, he said, I built you, great and mighty God, this temple. And it was just, Solomon at this point was very, very humble and had a lot of gratitude. All right. And so then we get into the prayer of dedication. Now, are there any comments or questions anybody might have at this point? Any comments or questions? Just unmute yourself and say away. Okay. Well, I guess everybody's asleep. All right. Next, we have Solomon's dedication, the prayer of dedication. And so the attitude of Solomon here is, you take note of that, because here he is. He started out in a standing. He started out in the prayer. He was standing, and so by the end of the prayer, he's on his knees, and so it was that attitude when he first started out, that he's addressing the people, he's praying to God, and but it didn't take long until he got down in that inferior position of being on his knees before the deity, and he would in the position of fealty, I guess you would say. And so this prayer that he prayed here is actually the longest prayer in the Bible. There's no other prayer that is longer than that. And so it centers on the Mosaic covenant. Actually, that's the heart of the prayer. And he introduced 7 petitions that they kind of got to have a backward look. They emphasized God's faithfulness, and then he concluded with a forward look, expressing God's mercy. So the these are I pull these out and kind of looked at them for what they say to me, that he had 7 petitions for God's mercy, and for mercy on our personal sins. Forgive us of our personal sins and have mercy on us. And another is to defeat in battle, have mercy that we don't get defeated in battle. And then if there's a drought, then again, we pray that you would save us from this drought, and or if there be famine for whatever reason, from pestilence or whatever, no enemies or whatever, then have mercy on us and grant us relief from the famine. And then go on grace. Even this was an interesting one. He even talked about having grace on God-fearing foreigners, people who were not Israelites, but that they were God-fearers, good people. And he's saying, have mercy on these people too. And then he goes on to say, have mercy on the Israelites in battle, who are fighting the battles. And then also, if we lose and we're in captivity, which sometimes happens, then have mercy on us at that point too. Kind of a strange prayer to have for a dedication of the temple, but it's that was basically the theme that he had there. All right, and then he went on to the benediction. Now, notice here that Solomon, in many ways, is acting as not only the king here, but he's also in many ways acting the part of being the priest, the Kohen Hagadol, the high priest, at the ultimate, and maybe just a regular priest at the minimum. But here he is coming up, and it's almost like he could give a ironic benediction to these people, not being the leader, not being their priestly leader, but just being as their king. And so he gives the this benediction in chapter 8 and verse 54 through 61, that he starts out talking about God's faithfulness to them, and um, then he goes on from there. Says when Solomon finished praying this, let me see, change glasses here, folks. When Solomon finished praying this entire prayer, his prayer of dedication and petition to Adonai, he arose from before the altar of Adonai from kneeling on his knees. Remember, he had started as standing up. Now he's kneeling, and his hands spread out toward heaven. Then he stood and blessed all the congregation. He's acting as a priest with a loud voice. Blessed be Adonai, who has given rest to his people Israel according to all that he's promised. Remember that during the time of Solomon, the reign of Solomon was 40 years long. So he started out when he was about 20, and by the time he was 60, he was done. And during that 40 years, they didn't have any wars, no battles. It was at peace. Everybody, you had a whole generation that grew up and didn't know what war was. All they knew was peace. And so he is at this point thanking God then for his blessings. And actually it's almost thanking him for future blessings, because it's going to be peace. And he's talking about the faithfulness of God, even though they had problems, that God always brought them through. And so he's talking about God's faithfulness. Then he comes up with three or several things that are, I don't know if you could call them wishes, maybe, but in the Aaronic benediction that we do, we'll say, "The Lord bless you and keep you." And it is, some people have written it, and they interpret it as said, "May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine the light of his face on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up the light of his countenance to you and give you his peace." So we just dropped the may out of there, and it would be the same thing here if you drop the may out there. May Adonai be with us, even or as with our fathers. That was he wanted a continuation of that faithfulness that God had given to them, and to be able to still stay with this present generation like he had the other one. Don't leave us, forsake us. They don't want to be stuck out there in Canaan, because what would happen if God departed from them? They would be swallowed up by their enemies so quickly. It's kind of like today. What if God forsook Israel today? How long would it take for the forces of evil to come on them? All right. And so he says, may he incline our hearts to him. And so he's requesting, or he's praying that the people would always have that inclination to worship God, rather than the inclination to not worship him. And so he says, so why do we want all of these things? Well, we want that so that all the world will know that he is God. Like I say sometimes when I'm praying, that somebody can be healed so that they know that there is a God in Israel and he's still the healer. And so that's what Solomon is saying here, that we want all of these things, not for ourselves especially, but so that your glory would be seen in all the world, and all the world will know that, yes, you are God. And so he talks to the people, and he tells them that it's kind of an admonition to them to be totally devoted to Adonai, and to keep his commandments, because that's the way that you're going to be able to stay in this realm of this area of peace and prosperity and security and fellowship with the Lord by keeping his commandments. So then it talks about the sacrifices that Solomon did. And I mean, these numbers are just phenomenal, if you ask me, that 22,000 oxen. Now, you wouldn't have thought that there would have been 22,000 oxen in all of Israel, but that's what the Bible says. And then it says 120,000 sheep. That's a bunch of them. Now, they didn't do this all in one day. They did this over a period of 14 days. And they may not have even done it at this new temple. They may have done it in satellite locations around Jerusalem to get this many animals sacrificed for the Lord. But and then I don't even know how they were to have these animals were probably not burned totally up. They were not an olah offering. They were the burnt offering for sin. Some of these would have been for fellowship or whatever, because then the priest would eat some of this the meat. So the priests for a few days were really eating well there. All right. And so then I got to looking, well, that's a lot of cattle and livestock being slaughtered. But then look at just the normal sacrifices that were called for during Sukkot. Now, this was on day one, you'd have 13 bulls, and then day two, one less, and then day three, 11, and so forth, till you get down to the last day, and you would sacrifice 7 bulls. Well, if you add that up, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, what do you get? You get 70. What was that for? They were making atonement for the known nations of the world at that time. That was what they considered the number of nations of all of the world, number of peoples, was it was 70. And so that's why they sacrificed the bulls, so that when they were thanking God for all of their blessings, they were also offering a sacrifice for the well-being and maybe for the sins also of their neighbors who were not not in their camp, but that was part of it.